What is up, everyone? Let's go ahead and get started here. Hopefully you guys are doing well. First things first, you want to go ahead and put in the PGNs. What I have right now in my hands are handwritten PGNs. From Miami, there was an over-the-board chess tournament that I competed in this past weekend, and I wrote it all down using chess notation. Very important to maintain a history of your over-the-board games so that you can go back to them and practice them, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to play these games over the board because it's been a long time. There's nothing quite like playing over the board as opposed to online. You can feel the atmosphere, the person you're playing in front of you. You can actually touch the pieces. Like, everything is just so much better that way. Anyway, when you go ahead and input your games. So that's exactly what we're going to go ahead and do right now. I'm playing as white. Let me go ahead and create a new chapter. Full name for my opponent. I know I'm going into this game. There are a couple of strategies you could do before your first game. Get as much information on your opponent as possible. Their rating, score, age, see how they've done in the past. And in this case, I had no information on my opponent at all. I even Googled him and I couldn't find any games, nothing. So I just had to look on the US Chess Federation, see if he was active. This is something I actually didn't do before this first game, so I just kind of went in and was like, okay, I'm going to play my best possible game here. We'll see where that takes us. Before I go ahead and put the game in, I want to let you know that I did finish in third place, or tied for third place, with 2.5 out of 4. It was a 4-round tournament over the weekend. It was a 60+2 tournament. Let me make a huge mention here. If you do not feel like you are ready to play your first move, there is no rush, especially in a classical time control. Here, I actually spent maybe a minute and a half making sure I was ready to play my first move over the board. And it builds tension. It builds tension between you and your opponent, because what is going on? Why is this person taking so long? I obviously know my repertoire. I know exactly what I'm going to do on my first move, but I took my time. Knight f6. And then I normally play London, but I wanted to try out the Chompowski for the first time in a tournament game, so I had the opportunity to do so. Opponent plays knight e4, I play bishop back to f4, and he goes for d5. So I'm reading exactly as it shows onto my notation here. There comes a point when you're down to 5 minutes or less, you do not have to take notation anymore. And in this game, I did not fall into time trouble. The next game I did, and we're going to see how that affects the scoring, how it affects maybe my legibility, even decision making. I'm going to just briefly talk about why I played each move while I'm inputting the moves. So again, I waited a minute and a half before I played my first move. And I think that's also important to put into your notes online. Sat for a minute. Opponent plays knight f6. Chompowski, and also I'd like to note what happened to my opponent. Again, my opponent is of higher rating. My opponent on this move is that they actually paused. They paused for a long time. I think they spent maybe 3 to 4 minutes on this move, and that means it's a move they're not expecting. It's a move that doesn't happen very often for them in tournament games, especially. Because one, they could be going through lines in their head that they've seen before, or they could be already out of book and trying to figure out over the board. He plays knight to e4, striking at my bishop. I play the simple bringing it back to f4. And the idea here is that now it's similar to a London-esque bishop. He's sitting on f4 instead of g5. He plays d5. I played f3 because that's part of my mainline repertoire, and the main idea is to get an e4. And again, my opponent paused for about maybe 4 minutes here. Like, I was impressed at how much time he was spending in just the opening stages. And this is important in over the board especially. You got a psychological edge on your opponents because they are taking their time. They are not sure exactly what they want to play on each move. And that builds confidence for yourself. You know that on your next move, you can spend just as much time. You can spend time on their clock thinking about what you want to do to go over your lines again. And that's exactly what I did on my opponent's clock. He brought the knight back to f6. And after knight f6, I had almost forgotten my theory. I knew that the main idea was to get an e4, and I played knight to c3. The idea is to prepare e4, this f-pawn, even though it does weaken the dark squares, a lot of people may note, and it's almost impossible for black to exploit those dark squares. Again, I'm just going to be brief with some of the ideas here. He goes for his c6 idea, and one of the main reasons to play c6 here is, first off, it's a passive move, and for white, that's a good thing that black's being passive. You can always push forward even faster. But this move is actually stopping the idea of knight g5, which actually comes with a very annoying fork here on c7. The only way to properly meet that would be to play knight to a6, or maybe a potential idea of pawn to e6. So if the knight were to go here, you can then play bishop to d6. Even though it does give up the bishop pair, it gives black a ginormous center where they can get all the play in the world. And from here, I just went down the simple e4 is the reason why I played knight c3 to get in the central pawn thrust. He goes over the queen b6, and normally queen b6 is very strong because the pawn will go to e3 and there's no retreating back the bishop to c1. However, in this case, this does come with some pizzazz, some annoyance, where after taking on b2, they'll be striking out 2 pieces, and I had to be very careful. I did take a long think here. Actually, this was my first big think in the game, probably 10 minutes. And I thought, how can I possibly give this pawn up as a poisoned pawn? I was looking at simple ideas. Okay, maybe bring the bishop, maybe capturing, maybe playing knight to a4. I wasn't feeling it. I really wanted to make my opponent think more and make him think more about whether or not to take this pawn. So I found a very tricky idea. Very happy to play this move a3. First off, a3 is to stop a4. So the queen were to take, that's 1 less retreat square. Second, I'm also taking away the a3 square because now it's covered by the rook. So this is a very strong move, taking away a lot of squares around the queen. And if she were to try to take this quote-unquote poisoned pawn, you actually start getting a lot of initiative here as white. So after knight a4, the queen can't really stay here, and she's already trapped. I was wondering, when can he maybe break this idea? And he tried to do that with his next move, which was to capture in the center of the board. So I recaptured my f-pawn. Now I have a ginormous center. I thought I can use this to my advantage in the long term. If I can castle faster than my opponent, I can start breaking open the position. And then from here, he played bishop g4, and this was another moment where I knew I had to take a very mature approach to the position. I can't just play a simple a natural move like knight f3. Even though it's probably okay, I still want to maintain this as a poisoned pawn and make my opponent think some more. How do I maintain this threat? And I found the idea of bishop e2. Why bishop e2? It does offer trade of bishops, yes, but it does multiple things. 1, I'm developing a piece that hasn't moved yet. 2, I'm creating a counter threat. And 3, if they were to capture, it helps develop another piece of mine. So it comes with a lot of positivity with this one move. He didn't have to think long. He found that he had to take here. I thought it'd be interesting, maybe h5, but then I could force this idea, and it's still pretty much the same position with h3 involved. And h3 actually avoids a lot of those back rank issues that I was possibly having in the later stages of the game with the escape square in h2. After captures, immediately I took here. Don't want to take with the queen as the rook would not be protected. Queen takes now comes with a very strong, annoying threat. You can't get away with this. So you had to take with the knight. And after knight takes on e2, he plays e6. And I think this is a very strong move. It has to be played more or less because you want to get your bishop out and get castled as soon as possible, especially with these giant pawns in the center of the board. Now, another critical moment here. I do want to make this clear. Your opponent is not castled. You're 1 move from castling. And how do you slow down your opponent from castling? Yes, I could just play it naturally and immediately castle and they develop their piece, but I wanted this move to come with so much strength that I already had a deep idea involved in it. And what I found was there's actually this interesting bishop to g5 line. After castles, d5 is already the fundamental idea of busting open the center. If you were to play a normal move like this, I can already start looking to open this position. And my opponent played, I think was a good move, knight b to d7, which tries to close down the position here just a little bit so that if this pawn push does come, the king has a little bit of coverage. But maybe it was just a little too slow. I think maybe bishop e7 was just maybe a little bit stronger in the sense that I can't immediately push. Because now after knight b d7, I play, I believe, again, another very strong move, king h1. It now allows the possibility of a pawn push. And there is one thing I do need to note. There's something you got to be very, very careful of, is this knight to g4 line. A lot of you guys probably are wondering right now, why in the world am I going through the game without a computer? Well, that actually brings us to step 2. Bam. No computers, notes only. And this is super important because the computer is mostly a blunder check. And if you could try to figure it out by yourself over the board and figure out all the ideas and just try to remember the entire game, that's going to help a lot in your chess development. Definitely try to go over your games first without a computer and then use the computer. Make sure to see if all your thoughts lined up properly, especially after a tournament game. So king h1, then he plays h6 because king h1 came with the dual threat of bishop g5. Now, let's say he played a natural move like bishop to e7 now, and then I play bishop g5. Well, this comes with a huge annoyance because after castles, I have this idea where I'm already winning the piece. And my opponent obviously saw this, which is why he played h6. And obviously, if he's going to castle, He's probably going to go king side, so after bishop back, suddenly, where's the king going to castle? That's a good note to put into here, so let me go ahead and do that real quick. Protects king, he and I talked about after the game, but I believe that's a good move because it stops all my ideas altogether, and I think that's what needed to be played in the position. And take a good look at this bishop. He has no good development squares, like aggressive ones. D6 is covered, C5 is covered, B4 is covered. My whole purpose is to prevent this bishop from ever becoming strong, and that's what these pawns are doing right now in this bishop. So I knew that his only move to develop the bishop is to D7, which means he has to play H6 to prevent bishop G5. I then thought of a very interesting idea here, and my opponent is down to maybe 25 minutes to my 45 or 50 almost. Like, I haven't used too much time. It's pretty straightforward, the plans that I've had, and he made it pretty easy, because he's just reacting to every single move I've played so far. I decided my next move, not just for that psychological, but also there was one threat I was a little bit worried about. Maybe a potential, not immediate, but potential knight g4. If I ever push this pawn, maybe there's a potential smothered mate idea that I don't want to have if this knight ever moves from the g1 square. So I do want to avoid any potential tactics over there, and that's why I played this next move, knight a4. Knight a4 forces the queen off of the diagonal, so there is no more of this smothered idea. And a lot of people may be like, well, dude, you're putting your knight onto an unattacked square and allowing the queen to attack you. And I knew this, but then I thought, I'm just going to bring my bishop, my knight back. The reason I am allowed to waste time here is because his king is not castled, mine is, and I'm about to push in the center. I want the center push to happen without the queen on this diagonal. Now, if he did go back to b6, then I'd be like, okay, I got to figure something else out. But because he didn't, bishop to e7, it was in this moment that I finally was like, okay, I can actually get this pawn push in, but I got to play at the right moment. You have to be very careful about this pawn push. If you do not do it correctly, you're down a pawn, and even a worse position. So, and it's probably actually not even the right time to do it. I'm sure computer, if we do turn it on, is going to say it's not the best move. But I think this is the most practical. It took him another 5 minutes, so he's down to under 20. And he plays bishop to e7. I found a very nice idea after d5. I did play in the game. After c takes d5, there's a very important Zwischenzug here. Zwischenzug being an in-between move, guys. So find the in-between move that gets back your pawn and maintains annoyance in the entire position. Very, very strong move. Go ahead, YouTube. b4, Anikit's got it. Intermezzo, Zwischenzug. Very nice find. It gets the queen off of this line from the pawn. So now that when she goes back to b6, I can now take here and get my pawn back. I saw this move back here, because this is the only way you can get the d5 pawn push in. And if you notice, he still can't castle. He could and just be down a pawn, but he decided to capture with the pawn. And when your opponent isn't castled and you are, and you have all the or most of your pieces out in the attack, and your opponent still doesn't quite have it, and the center is opened up, you have to look for initiative, and that's exactly what I did here. Every single move is going to come like this. So, bam, I take on d5, he takes back, and I take again on d5. He can't castle because of the threat on the knight. However, before capturing here with the knight, what I did notice is that he has the potential of knight f6 striking at my queen after a bunch of exchanges. And I asked myself, is there a good square for my queen to go to after she struck at? Is this worth it? I even thought about it back here. I thought, is it worth having the knight on f6 to strike at my queen? And I had to be able to visualize in my mind that this pawn is not there after that entire exchange. And that's when I found the move queen e5 in this position. So d5 takes, b5 back, takes, and then after knight f6, I play queen e5. This move I thought of 5-6 moves back. And it's a very strong position now for white. It's preventing black again from castling. There's a pin on the bishop. The king's the only piece who could defend it. Now it's a tremendous attack here for white, and you have to keep the attack going. So after queen to e5, my opponent plays castles. And I thought this was an interesting move. So hang on. He castles, and I ripped this move off the board. Bam! I took it in under a second because I knew this worked. It didn't even have to process in my mind. I knew it worked. And he paused another 10 full minutes here because now he's down a full pawn. And I was like, after this move, I should be okay. Like, again, I double checked my calculations after knight e6. Is this move still okay after what I calculated 5 moves ago? Yes, it's still okay. I know his rooks are about to come over. I know it. But I know that there's also all this threat here with all these attackers. So queen castles, takes, and after captures, I had the idea of taking here, and he has a ruined pawn structure for the endgame. That's all I cared about at this point, is just play for endgame and win. Also up a pawn. I wasn't worried about this rook move, which he plays in the game. I go ahead and just simply capture. Queen takes, and rook takes. So we have this endgame position. I was very, very happy to get here. I have 42, maybe 40 minutes left on my clock, and he has under 10 minutes. And the fact that I have so much time, I walked away, and I took 5 minutes to myself just to relax. Because my heart was pounding, I was nervous, I knew I was better, and I knew if I played a move now without thinking, I would screw it up. I have 40 to 50 moments on my clock, so I know that I'm in a great spot in this game to relax and take my time, so I did. I took that time to relax. Here, I finally found the idea of c4. There are some other moves I was thinking of. I was thinking of capturing here, but then he gets some initiative, and he could take here anyway. I could double up, but that doesn't really do much. And I thought, let me let him fight for the pawn. He plays rook to c2, gives me the easy move, c4, or c5. And then he tries a5. a5, I think, was just an immediately losing move here. This is round 1. I thought it was interesting, though, because obviously a lower-rated player may capture and ruin their entire pawn structure. 3 isolated pawns would be awful, especially doubled and whatever. But rook b6 is the move I played in the game. Good job, Aniket. That move just kind of stuck out. I knew I was maintaining pressure here. I have ideas of playing here and forcing him to play passive again. Look how passive this rook is. It's terrible. And look how active this guy is. He is beautiful. This guy is beautiful. He's not watching over a silly little pawn. I'm just enjoying my position. There is no rush to win the endgame. If you rush the endgame, you're more likely to make a mistake. So you have to take your time, and that's exactly what I did here. I took my time, and I don't mean on the timer. I mean on the board. Take your time. Do not force anything. Do not rush. Just little improvement, little improvement, little improvement, and suddenly the game just will be over before you know it. So rook b8. This is when I played h6 to allow this rook to move. No back rank ideas, and it's just an easy game from here. The king is just going to run all the way over if I can. Any point he tries to attack this pawn, I have rook f3. So, and your rook c3 is played. I play rook f3. He's obviously going to avoid the trade because it's worse for him. If you were to accept it, even though it does ruin my pawns, this guy is still tied down to a silly little pawn. So after rook f3, rook c4, I play rook f to f6. Now, this one comes with the idea of I will pitch this pawn now, because I could have done it back here, but the problem was I was going to get back ranked. So I waited until this position to play it. Attacking this guy, that's going to be another passer, easy stuff. That's why he pushed. Rook f5, he pushed again. And then after h4, I finally captured here. So why did I capture on this move? Well, actually going back, I was asking myself here, how can I get this pawn push in? The only way to do so is to get the rook off of the c file. He's not moving from the c file. So I might as well get another pawn on the a file. And that's exactly what I went for. And then he plays rook to e8. Obviously, I know that he's looking for maybe potential check, rook over, and mating ideas. I'm not afraid. I simply captured because I knew I was going to get some stuff over here. He plays check, king up, and then rook down. By the way, he has 17 seconds here, if not less. I still have 30 minutes. So what I just now played on the next move is a ginormous blunder. Had I just done a different move, I would have been just fine. So I can never push this pawn because of a checkmate idea. All I had to do was capture here with the rook. After the king moves, I can then push the pawn because after a rook, I can back up. That would be just fine. That is not what happened in the game here. I blundered here, and I freaked out because he Well, first, I saw it and he didn't see it. I played here. All he had to do was king up. I saw that instantly because now I have nothing left. After check, over, check here. Excuse me, check here. And then if I try to give another check, I can't give any more checks and he's still threatening mate. Game's over. So that's why I would have to take with this rook. He missed it. Instead, he played for king activity. He played king g6. And here, I play rook g7, rook check, check, picked up the rook, and I went on to win this position from here.